This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek.fm.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's show about Star Trek Discovery. I'm Mike, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Amy. How's it going, Amy?
It's fabulous. We are here in Las Vegas, recording in the same room. This is so rare and such a treat. Pleasure being here.
Yeah, it's the way to do it if you can, right? I mean, it's like you don't have to wait for like your internet connection to whatever, and things are spontaneous. You know, you're not laughing at things that you think people might have said because the signal cut out or whatever. And we're joined by a couple of other hosts on Trek FM today. Bruce from Literary Treks. How's it going, Bruce?
It's going great. I'm so glad to be here. This is my first Las Vegas Star Trek convention. I've been to Vegas before, but not for the convention.
Is it everything you hoped for and more?
So far.
All right. And we're also joined by Amy's new host on Earl Grey, Justin. How's it going, Justin?
Great to be here, actually podcasting in the same room with people. Great to be here for Star Trek Las Vegas. It's my first Star Trek con of any kind. And I was so excited by everything that's been going on so far. So great to be here.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have everyone here. And today, we're recording this on Wednesday night. Today was Disco Day here at the Star Trek Las Vegas. 4 hours of disco, and it wasn't like your normal day at a con where it's like, okay, and now we've got to reset the stage. They just rolled one right into the other, and it was like a marathon. At one point, like, I really, really had to go to the bathroom. I did that while Neville Page and Glenn Hetrick, they were talking about, their Klingon costumes and stuff. They were answering questions. I'm like, here's my chance, And,
so you actually left to go to the bathroom?
For a very, very few...
You didn't do it in the room. Okay,
I'm
glad to hear
that. Not in the room.
That.
I forgot to save my water bottle next time. But, it was pretty intense. So, okay, there were 4 panels. The first... we'll just say what they all were up front, and then we'll go through them, one after the other. The first one was Inside the Writer's Room. The second one was... Meet the cast, or whatever they want to call it, the actors. The third one was the design team, and the fourth one was the expanded universe, the literary treks, if you will.
That sounds good. That sounds really good.
Yeah, I think it's a catchy name for a podcast. If anyone wants to steal that, feel free, but copyright me. So, let's just start from the beginning. The writer's room. Now, we knew that Ted Sullivan, who's the co-executive producer, and Kirsten Beyer, who's a staff writer who also has, of course, written many novels for Voyager, they were going to be here. But what we didn't know was that Academy Award winner Akiva Goldsman, executive producer of Disco, was also going to be here. And I don't know about you guys, but that was a very pleasant surprise for me.
Well, yeah, I've heard you talk about how much you love Akiva Goldsman, so I know you're excited about that. But one thing I was impressed by, I knew a lot about Kirsten Beyer and a good amount about Ted Sullivan. He's just lights up Twitter with his love of Trek. But I had heard little bits, but I hadn't known quite as much how big of a Star Trek fan Akiva Goldsman is going way back. And I think that's a theme we'll see on these different panels, that the people that are putting together this show are big Star Trek fans, and that's a huge thing. That's really important. I mean, as the history of Star Trek has proven, you don't have to be a Star Trek fan beforehand to make great Trek, but it really helps to have a bunch of them together that really love it, and that's one of the things I was impressed by.
So I noticed that as well. Like every single person said, "Oh yeah, I'm a huge Star Trek fan," but so I have a question, like, do you think it almost seems forced? I mean, do you actually believe them? Because it seems like, well, yeah, I'm a Star Trek fan, and it's like they're forcing the issue as if previously, that they've heard murmurs of Star Trek fans saying you're not a real fan or whatever. It seems almost forced, or is that just me?
I think it depends. Like there's some cases like Akiva Goldsman, for example, I think his first Star Trek convention was in 1976, so he's been a Star Trek fan for a long time, and for Ted Sullivan, I think it was sometime in the 80s. But there are other examples, like, on the actors panel, Mary Chieffo, I think, had been a Star Trek fan, but she got kind of more into it, and Anthony Rapp, who wasn't there today, hadn't really had much familiarity, but started like going through it in a big way. So I think for some of them, they've been longtime fans. For others, they've kind of caught up or watched more of it, but there were a few that may not have been as familiar with it. But I think the majority of the ones we saw have been fans for a long time, from what I could see. So
it seems like every writer is a fan. Was that the case for Voyager and Enterprise?
I definitely don't think it was the case for Enterprise because, well, some of them had come over from Voyager, I know, but there were a lot who they kind of brought in from other sources. And, obviously there were some people who were big fans like David Goodman and stuff like that. But I think maybe some of the other people they brought in just because they were good writers, And I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to think if there's anyone on the Discovery team who seems like that. And I don't think there is. It seems like everybody to some degree or another is a Star Trek fan. Like, I would say probably the person who is the least Star Trek fan-y is probably like Nicholas Meyer, but he created like two of the best things in the history of the franchise, so I guess he gets a free pass.
Yeah, so it was really fun to hear their stories, and I think, yeah, it was good to hear that and their love for Star Trek.
For sure. So, okay, couple of things that they sort of were talking about at this panel. I don't know if there's anything that stood out to anyone. I mean, Bruce, was there anything in this panel where you were just like, hey?
I may confuse panels, but I think, was it this one they mentioned the 24 Klingon houses?
No, that wasn't until later
the actors?
on. Yeah, I think that was the actors. Yeah.
Okay, so nothing stood out to me on this panel. No, I think basically what we were just talking about is just that they have a respect for canon, and whether they're fans or not of Star Trek, I think they are just trying to alleviate people's minds that they are respecting what came before, they are respecting canon. It sounds like they are trying to be very careful as writers. So if anybody's concerned that they're going to go too far off course, I don't think they need to worry about that. Also, there was points where all the episodes are all connected as one big arc, but then it sounded like there's little standalone episodes that focus on characters. So I was glad to hear that.
Yeah, they mentioned that. I think it was Sullivan mentioned that Byers' episode, at least her first episode, was very much a Saru episode, and he said that it was the most like classic Trek in a sense, which I thought was kind of interesting. One of the other things which I thought was interesting, just going back to Akiva Goldsman and his fandom for a minute, and his involvement in the show, because I think a lot of people are kind of wondering, like, what exactly is his involvement? And we've kind of speculated about that over on Stage 9 and everything, because Goldsman is someone who, he's got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, every movie that comes out was either written or produced by Akiva Goldsman. today in theaters, Dark Tower, written by Akiva Goldsman, which we'll be talking about next week on Stage 9. So there you go. But the thing that he said, which really stood out to me, was that Discovery is the single most important thing creatively in his life right now. That's impressive for a guy who's doing, like stuff which is winning Oscars and stuff like that,
Yeah, definitely. And I think he was wearing a Star Trek hat. I mean, it was clear that he was a big fan, but I mean, there were a couple of other things that stood out for me. They actually, I think Akiva Goldsman specifically said that Brian Fuller laid out a whole season arc, and he said signposts along the way that we've held to. So it was interesting to hear it confirmed that there are certain things that had been laid out by Brian Fuller that they've kept to. Surely they've changed some things, but they're keeping along a certain arc that he wanted to have, and I thought that was really interesting. And it was great also to see the interaction among the writers in this one, because you could tell they've gotten to know each other. They have a good rapport. There was one point when Kirsten Beyer was saying that some of the things they're doing are pushing boundaries, and then sometimes it has to be reeled back in, and she kind of like touched Akiva Goldsman like, hey, sometimes I need to do that for you. So they got this good rapport, and I think, I saw that in a lot of the different panels. It's great that they kind of are getting along and doing something. It feels like for a lot of them that are real big fans, they're doing something they really believe in and want to make a statement on. It's not just like another paycheck, which I thought was really cool to see in that panel.
Yeah, I liked when they said that this series is going to be the most serialized ever. Like, you're going to see these arcs, even more so than DS9, that it's just really going to be thematically deep. However, the main focus is the character, and they said, like, even characters are the rudder of the ship. Like, that's where the focus is, and the story is what comes later. But then they always were talking about, like, how the story is going to be a metaphor for what we're dealing with. So it's still going to be Star Trek, and we're still going to get those characters, but it's going to be pushing those boundaries even more to fit more of what today's television looks like.
One of the things which I found to be really interesting, because obviously this movie has had a very, very long, pre-production process, and there's, of course, the whole thing with Fuller leaving and all that stuff. And, there was a big question, I think, in terms of, Fuller's involvement and everything, and, we talked a little bit about that. But, I think it's always been assumed that, that pilot was written by Kurtzman and Fuller, and that was basically set in stone. And then, even at one point, Fuller was like, Nicholas Meyer right now has written, episode 2 and everything. And, it sounds like that has changed, because Sullivan came onto the show fairly late in the process, I think. And he said that when he came on, the script for the pilot had not been written yet. So I'm wondering if when Fuller left, they basically started from scratch, at least in that, level of finality in terms of the writing, It's kind of weird. But it'll be very interesting to see, what the final product is in relation to what Fuller had planned. Okay, any other things from the first panel that anyone thought was interesting?
The other thing is there was an audience member that asked about the Kelvin timeline movies and how those look and the feel, and how Discovery, will it feel more like that or a little or not at all? And everybody just kind of answered like, yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, in the sense of the visuals and the way it's shot. And the big thing they wanted to portray is the fact that this is a big production for a TV show, more so than we've seen with the previous series. So no, it's not going to be like the Kelvin universe in terms, I think, of story, because they have more time to tell story, more time to focus on characters. But visually, there's going to be some similarities because of both the movies and the series have big budgets, and that we are in the 21st century now. So production has changed quite a bit since 1966.
Yeah, and I like hearing that they're still going to have the techno babble, which was the first time I heard that term. I've heard technobabble, but Treknobabble. And it was good to hear that Rap was pretty good at that. And so it was interesting because, with science, and then I was like, oh, that means math. So my ears perked up. And that they do, really do research, just the basic common ideas, and then use it in there. And so that there will be lots of Treknobabble, which was sort of made me happy.
Yeah, and it was really interesting kind of hearing them talk about how many people who are on the writing staff have science backgrounds. Like, they mentioned that Erica Lapolt has a PhD in like neuroscience or something like that, and all those things. And it is kind of cool that the people involved with writing that technobabble actually have some science background in order to sort of back it up.
Just a couple other things. I mean, one thing that I think was great was that there was a really good turnout. The room was pretty packed, so there were a lot of people who were interested in it. And during all of these panels, I think people were like really respectful and really interested to find out about the show, which was great. And there was actually something else Akiva Goldsman said that I took note of. I'm hoping to misspeak, but he was saying that the trailers mostly cover the first 3 episodes, and I think we were assuming it was maybe the first 2 episodes, and he said mostly, so there might be something that's a little further beyond that. So I thought that was an interesting little bit that we hadn't gotten before, that what we see in the trailer may go a little further than we thought that it did.
One other thing I liked that they talked about was this Roddenberry rule, and that is, that your characters are not going to have conflict, and how that applies to, the television series now. And apparently it's malleable. And so I sort of like that they said that. But again, keeping in line with the Roddenberry vision of this utopia society and how it's very much needed today, just as it was in the 60s, and that in order to get that utopia, you have to have conflict. You're not going to get utopia society just by everyone waking up one morning and saying, oh, we're going to be perfect. Yeah, no, there's going to be conflict. And they talked a lot about you already know the end result, right? We know that Captain Kirk is going to, have the Enterprise. So we know where it's going to end up, but how do we get there and why do we get there? And those are the stories that I'm looking forward to see. So I really liked that they talked about that and saying, yeah, there's going to be conflict, but there's a purpose behind it.
Oh, no, I just had a comment about the Roddenberry rule thing, which I think isn't really that big of a deal because that didn't exist in TOS. Actually, there was lots of conflict between the characters even on the ship, so that's something that was instituted just in TNG. So if they're like having this I think that's great. I mean, I think it's natural that would happen and that can be within a utopian society. So I think it's great that they're doing that. But like one of the I think maybe it was in a later panel, but one of the things that struck me was how many times they were talking about how important relationships and story are, and what's happening visually is in service of that story or of the writing, which is great to hear because I think that you are going to get those great visuals. They're putting a lot of money into it, but like what the writers are writing is kind of the focus of things, and the other things are just in service of making sure that expression gets across the right way. So I like that they're specifically saying that the focus is really on the story and the message.
So I have a question. Do you remember when they were talking about when is it time to break the ring? I don't know what they were I know they were talking about like how canon is, and like so now it's 10 years before Kirk, right? And so yeah, so tell me, what were they talking about with that?
Well, basically, what they were saying, the example that they were using was talking about Bruce Timm writing a story for the Justice League cartoon, and how he thought that it would be really good if they did a story where Green Lantern's ring was broken. And the writing staff on that show was like, you can't do that because it's indestructible. You literally cannot break the ring. And Tim's whole thing was like, maybe we should ignore that for this story because it would actually be a good story. And I think what they were saying in relation to Star Trek is like there is canon, there is all this stuff, but at some point you gotta say, okay, let's just do something which would be good instead of something which would be canonical. I think that's kind of what he was saying there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
One thing that was interesting about the writing process, which I thought was really cool, was Sullivan was talking about how like the executive producers, Berg, Harberts, Kurtzman, and Goldsman, were really sort of like the architects for the story, and then the writing team would help to sort of turn that into something workable or whatever, filmable, whatever it is, tapeable. I don't know what it is anymore. They shoot on, like, it doesn't matter. Okay. But the analogy which he used, which I thought was really good, was he's like the executive producers basically, they go off in their room and create the overall story, and then they bring in a piece of marble, and it's the writer's job to chip away at that piece of marble and, sort of like create the finished product. I thought that was kind of a cool analogy. And one thing which did disappoint me, although I guess it speaks to sort of like a larger thing, someone asked like, okay, we've seen the Klingons reinvented, we're seeing, are we going to see other races or whatever? And they basically said, not really. And some examples that were thrown out were whatever, Andorians or the standard thing. And they were kind of like, whatever. But then someone mentioned Gorn, and Goldsman said flat out, no Gorn. And that's just sad. I'm sad about that. But all right, so now let's move on to the thing which I think many people consider to be the main event, and that was the actors. Up on stage for the first time, they had a couple of people. Another surprise, kind of. They had Mary Chieffo and Kenneth Mitchell, who are Klingons, and then they had Sam Bartholomeus. Did I pronounce that right? All right, hey! And then they had Wilson Cruz, who I think was a last-minute addition. So, yeah, what did you guys think about the acting panel?
The thing that stood out to me most about the acting panel were the two actors that played the Klingons. And I think it's because we've had so many concerns about what these Klingons are going to be like. And the fact that they're actually speaking Klingonese and actually doing it on stage and talking about how it's like doing Shakespeare, and the male actor, I can't remember his name right now, who plays Cole.
Kenneth Mitchell.
He referred to the book The Final Reflection from John Ford, written years ago, back in the 80s, I think it was. And so, I mean, they've done their homework, and you can tell they're so invested into the Klingons.
Is that a Star Trek book?
It's a Star Trek book.
Okay, because
yes.
I heard John Ford, and I'm like the director?
No.
Okay, all right.
No, the director wrote the book, too. No, I'm just kidding. It's a separate person. But it just seems like they're so invested in learning about the race and learning about the language that they're really doing their homework. They have a passion about these characters and about the Klingon race. And so I think we're going to see a lot with the Klingons, more in depth than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that struck me as well. And with Ken Mitchell, who plays Cole, he kept saying things in Klingon, and it sounded just like right on and menacing, and he's just perfect for it. And Mary Chieffo was, doing the same, maybe a little bit less so, but I follow her on Twitter, and she's frequently like putting tweets in Klingon, and she showed her like dog-eared destroyed copy of the Klingon dictionary. So they're really getting into it, and I think it was Ken Mitchell even said, like, sometimes I work 8 hours a day for weeks at a time, constantly repeating my lines in Klingon so that I can memorize. That dedication is extraordinary that they're putting into this, and I think that's kind of reflected in all of the different panels, the different layers of the show, the writing, the acting, the makeup artists, what they're putting into the books and comics. The level of dedication and time and effort and care they're putting into it is incredible. And I think for the Klingons, that's going to be so to a great extent, because they had talked about these 24 different houses, and they have different looks and different culture, and there's so much that's going to be put into it that really expands that world. And I hope makes it more like, what we see on Earth. We have so many different languages and cultures, and it can't be encapsulated by one culture or one language. People look different, they act different, there's different culture and history, and I hope that we'll see a lot of that to really build out the Klingons in a way we've never seen before.
Well, and it also sounded as if we're going to see more familiar-looking Klingons. It seemed to be hinted at that we'll start to see that maybe a little later in the other houses.
Well, and actually, Ken Mitchell was saying he's part of the House of Kor, which of course is a very familiar name. As basically the first Klingon that we ever saw was Kor. And yeah, they revealed an image of Cole. It did look more familiar, and I think people have had this issue with how some of the Klingons have looked so far, but they've explained that there are different houses that look different ways, which I think implies what we've seen in other parts of Star Trek is just like a portion of the different houses or the different kind of groups that are out there. So there's a real way to expand all of that, and I love that.
Yeah, the dedication really is there, because that Kenneth was saying, he's in 4 hours to get into what we saw that picture, 3.5 hours in makeup and half hour in wardrobe. And he's running his lines. And they mentioned that Robin Stewart is this Klingon grammar pronunciation coach. And that there's actually a couple of them. I just got Robin Stewart's name. Did you get the other?
I think the other one's a dialogue coach or something like that. But Robin Stewart she's the one she's a fan. She dresses up as Klingons and stuff like that, and she's learned the language, and they've brought her on as a consultant in order to make sure that the Klingon is right in this show. Yeah.
So Mary's like, yeah. So when we're speaking Klingon and then we get stopped, it's really hike, not hook or something. It was so funny what she did. I was like, wow, did you even hear a difference? But apparently there is a difference, and so the Klingon will be accurate.
Yeah, they said, this is the first time that I had heard this. I don't know if it was out there already, but 24 houses. And Laurel, who Mary Chieffo plays, is someone who's from 2 houses, I guess. Another thing which they said, which I thought was interesting, which I guess we kind of saw this already, but the Shenzhou's bridge is on the bottom of the saucer. That's cool. I guess that makes sense from what we've seen in the trailer. And yeah, the other thing that they said, going back to what you were saying, Justin, everyone who we've seen up until now has been from just one house. So it's, the look seems to be changing as we go on.
Yeah, I don't know if we can say they're from one house, because I think we have heard... Well, I guess it depends, because, sometimes in Star Trek, it's like, this is the house of Martok. Well, before Martok, whose house was it? So, it seems like it changes through the generations of lineage, and maybe it's all part of the same original house. I don't know. Maybe we'll get, an explanation, because I think at one point they did mention something about subtle hints to TOS and TNG, and I wonder if the, TNG hint has something to do with that kind of house structure, but... the Klingon actors are really impressive, but I was also very much impressed by Wilson Cruz, who I wasn't all that familiar with before, but he had a great presence there. At one point, he was, he plays a doctor on this show, and he was forgetting what, the name for a hypo spray, and he was like, come on, people, give me some slack. He actually had a really good rapport with the crowd, and there was a really moving moment where he was talking about what it means to play an openly gay character in a relationship with another gay character, and it was really moving to watch that. And he was talking about how much it's going to mean for someone, who might be questioning their sexuality or really, wondering where they fit into things. So, that I was impressed by his presence as well, and what he's going to add to the show, and just all of them together. Again, in the writers' panel, they had this great interaction. I mean, I think Wilson Cruz hasn't been part of the show for too long, but they were just like getting along really well, and just seeing all of that. I think at one point Wilson Cruz says there's so much love on that set. Like there's just this feeling of, camaraderie and that they're doing something really great, and that just kind of came through in all of the different panels.
Yeah, like they were talking about like your main characters and how they were being supported by the main characters, and you definitely could feel the love. They were sincere, honest with us. It was a very, very good panel.
Yeah, and also that the actors are more of an ensemble. That was mentioned too. That the cast is more of an ensemble and not necessarily just based on 1, 2, 3 major characters. And I think Mary had mentioned that they all just get along. It's a fun set, and there's no egos in the room when they're doing the production. So, it sounds good. I hope what they're saying is true. I believe them, but they are actors, right? So, but I think it's a good sign when you have a cast that is well bonded and they seem to all really get along real well.
Definitely. I mean, I think that it is genuine. I mean, and I think the evidence is not just from what we saw in some of these panels, but from what you see on social media and how much they seem to be just like really into this and excited about it, which, I think that sometimes you can tell if someone's just kind of really forcing it out, but it seems like they're really into it. And I think Mary Chifo at one point was like, sometimes you work for, 18 hours in this prosthetic makeup and you're exhausted at the end of the day, but you're so happy that you did it for what you're doing. They feel like they're creating something important. And to me, that just like really came through and made me even more excited for what we're going to see.
Well, and I like that they also talked about, I can't remember who said it, but they were talking about, it was during the Q&A when some fan asked him a question, and they were saying, Discovery is meant for everyone, but they're going to make fans out of viewers. Like they want the viewers, but this show, and so I think it's going to, stay true to Star Trek and make fans, and they were very interested in creating the next generation of Star Trek fans. So that was very exciting.
Yeah, and the other point about the name Discovery they pointed out is that name is on purpose to also describe what the characters go through. They're all discovering themselves. So it was hard for them to, they talked about their characters, but the characters are going to change. And we heard that in the first panel from the writers and then from this one too, that there's going to be a lot that we learn about the characters early on, but by the end of the season, there's going to be a lot of changes to these characters. They're going to learn and grow.
One other little tidbit which might be fun for Star Wars fans out there is, when they were talking about, their homework and everything, all the stuff. Kenneth Mitchell, who plays Cole, said that he's good friends with Sam Witwer, the voice of Darth Maul on that Star Wars cartoon over there on the other side of the galaxy or whatever it is, and that Witwer sort of took him under his wing and showed him all of the essential Klingon episodes from throughout all of the series in order to give him a good idea of what he should be doing on Disco.
Yeah, someone we didn't really talk about much is Sam Bartholomeos. I think to a certain extent he was kind of overshadowed by what was going on for some of the other ones, but I was struck by something that he said. He was saying the first day that he got on set, he was about to go onto the bridge, and he said that it looked like so realistic he was afraid it was just going to like take off into space. I just thought that was a great little... But I mean, I think they're putting so much into it for them to feel like it's realistic, and he was giving some anecdotes about, the displays that they have and that they're working that I think you see in the trailer, and that they are ones that actually... I think he was saying they're on like a 5-second loop of things that happen, but there are ways I think they can manipulate them, and there's a certain amount of like realism and detail to try to get those actors into it. Of course, looking ahead at a green screen, but I mean the stuff that's around them, there's I think such attention to detail that he was talking about there. and it made me just like visualize what would it be like if I was an actor, going onto this set and thinking it looked so realistic that it felt like it could just like actually fly off into space. I thought that was really cool.
All right, so let's move on to the design panel. I have to say this is the one where I was kind of like, okay, yeah, but actually seeing it, I was like, holy crap. And I just kept on taking pictures of all of the slides that they would put up on the screen and sending them to John from Stage 9. And he was freaking out because this panel was all about the Klingons. So it was Neville Page and Glenn Hetrick who, have sort of like teamed up to design the costumes and the creatures and all that good stuff. And, their main focus was the Klingons. And, one of the things which was really interesting that Page said right off the bat was that Fuller brought Page on specifically to redesign the Klingons. And the thing that Fuller said to Page was, Klingons are self-aware aestheticians. Thank you very much. Aestheticians, yes. Okay. So, that was kind of like a really interesting sort of take on the Klingons and sort of like influenced their entire design philosophy. So now, Justin, you were missing that panel, right? You didn't see that one?
Yeah, I did miss most of it, although I saw some of the images later. And one of the things that really struck me is they said that there was about 80 people that are on the makeup and creature team. I don't know like what that compares to for, let's say, TNG era Trek or what it might be like on a movie, but that sounded like a lot of people to be focused on like the makeup and creature design. And some of the images I see that they were showing, it looks like at one point they were even showing like Klingon skulls and where the ridges originate. I don't know if anybody's ever even like attempted to do something like that before for that kind of biology. So just getting down to that level of detail to say, let's look at the bone structure of their heads and see and like work back for what the ridges should be in the different houses and all that stuff. It's just incredible, like what they're doing with this. And I think it's clear that CBS is spending a lot of money to give us a great product, but I think they're spending it really well to kind of build things up like meticulously layer by layer for this world. So even though I missed most of it, I could tell from the images that they're doing really very impressive work.
Well, the thing about the ridges I thought was interesting is they said it's not just about the Klingons having ridges, but why do they have ridges? What do they mean? What's it all about? And they were saying something about sensory, something within the ridges.
Holes are sensory pits like a python because the Klingons are apex predators like pythons. And the Klingons are bald because you want the sensors to be exposed so that they're effective. And bald Klingons were actually something which were mandated by Fuller himself.
And we saw, and it sounds like we're going to see some Klingons with hair, because they did say, they showed one of the skulls or one of the side view images where you see more of an elongated head in the back, like we saw from a leaked photo behind the scenes. I don't know if all Klingons have that same shape, but they said once they put hair on it, just to see what it would look like, it looked like a regular Klingon. If you saw a bald Klingon, their head shape would be a little different, which makes sense that a Klingon would not have the same shape of skull as a human.
Well, just a couple of other things which were really interesting. One thing which I found super interesting about this, because the Klingons are in the redesign of the Klingons are the thing more than anything else in this show that I think people are kind of like, all upset over in terms of like the change to canon and all that stuff. But one of the things which Hetrick said, which Hetrick himself is a huge Star Trek fan, according to him and Page. Hetrick said that he used to go to conventions when he was a kid growing up in Philadelphia and all that stuff. And Hetrick said, and this is pretty close to a direct quote, that they have an almost religious level of devotion to canon. So, that's pretty hardcore right there. One of the things that they kept on saying, and this goes to the whole thing that we were talking about with the ridges and everything like that, is that everything that was designed for both the biology and the sort of like aesthetic, clothing and props and all that stuff, everything has a purpose and a meaning, and that they didn't do anything just because it looks cool, and that's why they have the whole thing with the sensory pits and the whatever the hell and the whatevers. So that was kind of cool. The one thing which this kind of like blew my mind. Like, did you guys see the picture of? Here, I'll pull it up for you just so that you guys can see. Did you guys see the picture of the space suits, which are the big suits that you see with the the really crazy Klingon stuff? If you look on the thigh of that spacesuit, you can see little things that they look like forehead ridges almost.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, the detail in that.
But then if you go, and I'll show you the next image, you see like it's like a close-up of it where you can see like the holes, which is because they're spacesuits, that's jet propulsion or whatever. But then you can see little Klingon guys falling backwards and like sort of with their arms, open, and like them falling upside down is supposed to. Oh my gosh! That's supposed to symbolize. Stay on that picture, because that's supposed to symbolize like Klingons like letting go to destiny, and today is a good day to die and all that stuff. But additionally, if you look at the shape of the way the guy is falling, Page designed that as if it were the inspiration for the Klingon symbol.
Oh my gosh, yes, I can see that.
I mean, just the fact that they put that much detail into this thing, that's insane. And here's what I took away from this panel. And I don't know if there's anything else that you have to say about it, Bruce, but to me, the big thing that I took away from this panel was I'm excited about Klingons, which I've never ever been before in my entire life. I mean, hearing the whole thing with the 24 houses and then seeing the design and the detail and the reason for doing everything that they're doing, like, I'm now excited about this. If you told me, like a few months ago, like this is going to be a very Klingon heavy show, I would have been like, God, no, please, no. Now I'm like, bring it on, This seems awesome.
I feel the same way. I started to hear more and more about Klingons coming to Discovery. I was like, why does everything about Star Trek always have to start to revolve around Klingons? It's like, it's not that I don't like Klingons, but it just sometimes to me it feels like a little bit too much. But this really got me to the point where I was like, I want to learn so much, because I feel like we're going to be given so much. But because we're going to be given so much and so much detail, it's just going to make them so much richer. And you got to think we've had 50 years of Klingons, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
So speaking of having so much and maybe being given so much, transitioning on to the next panel where we're going to be getting a bunch more Klingon stuff, was the literary panel, where they basically laid out their plans for the Disco expanded universe, if you will. This panel involved Kirsten Beyer, once again, who's kind of like the liaison to the writing staff or whatever, or the go-between. And then you had Mike Johnson, who she's co-writing the comic book with, and David Mack, who is writing the first Disco novel, and then Sarah Gatos and Ed Schlesinger, who are the editors of the comics and the books, respectively. So, Bruce,
why me? Why are you looking at me?
I don't know. It just seems like this is your wheelhouse. Break it down for us. What was going on in this thing?
First, well, just to give a quick summary, the panel first started off with just asking each one of them how they got into Star Trek and how they got into writing. And I was like, are we even going to get to Discovery? I started to worry about that for a while. Yes, we eventually got to Discovery. But essentially the way it works is Kirsten, of course, is on the writing staff of the series, and she has also written 11 Voyager novels, which are very great Star Trek Voyager novels. And she's working a lot with IDW and Pocket Books to make sure that they have a consistent collaborative effort in the writings between the novels, the comics, and the TV series. So they should all fit together pretty well. They are giving the writers freedom to do what they need to do with it within their boundaries of the series. I think with David Mack, his novel Desperate Hours, which comes out 2 days after the U.S. premiere, September 26th, his novel will come out. It takes place, and this we didn't know about before, 10 years prior to the series.
No, the first novel is 1 year prior.
Is 1 year, and then
he specifically said May 2255 for the first novel.
That's right, because we were talking about that. Because that's Amy's birthday. That's right, because we were saying, okay, so if this novel takes place a year before the series, and he says it's 2255, then we know the series takes place in 2256.
And he also very specifically said that it's a year before the series and a year after The Cage, for what that's worth.
And The Cage is in 2254 in most timelines.
Basically, they read the back of the dust jacket,
Yes.
or whatever, and it was very, very long. So I didn't have a chance to write it down or anything, but basically it's going to take place aboard the Shenzhou right when Lieutenant Burnham becomes the acting first officer, and they've got to go through a whole mission about whatever, like in order for her to keep her job, or in order for her to get the job as the first officer. But it's also going to involve a mysterious person who she's tried most of her life to avoid, which, they basically flat out said it's Sarek, right? And the other thing about it, which was very, very interesting, is that they said that there may or may not be an appearance by another rather familiar ship to Star Trek fans. So, of course, it's the Enterprise. The Enterprise, commanded by Captain Pike, will be on this here novel.
Wait, why do you think it's Sarek that she's trying to avoid?
Because they kept on talking about Sarek and her relationship with him and everything like that. Maybe it's not. You think it's
I
Spock?
wonder if it's Spock.
Maybe. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Because there's got to be some connection. I think I've heard in the past they said like there'll be a reason why it makes sense that Spock's never mentioned her or something. That I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying it could be Sarek. It could be Spock. It could be Amanda for all we know.
Yeah, I'd forgotten they had this big synopsis of the novel, and I tried to write down a bit, but just kept going. Yeah. But one thing that was interesting was it was this adventure on the Shenzhou. I think they visit some Federation colony or planet, and there's some issue. It kind of sounded like it could be a TOS episode, which was kind of. It sounds like it's kind of this standalone story to where something happens that's going to affect something in the future. But yeah, they gave all this and they revealed the cover too, which has Burnham, and it's a picture of Sonequa Martin Green, and that was cool that they actually revealed the cover, which we hadn't seen before. I couldn't get the whole description. I want to see it in order to figure out what's going on in this novel. But I was already excited and pre-ordered it. But just hearing the story, it sounded really cool when I was hearing it.
One other thing that they said, which I thought was really interesting about this first novel, is that they said Fuller asked for a book on this premise specifically. So, whatever the backstory is in here, it's something which is sort of baked into the show, it seems. So that's cool.
So are the books canon, Amy?
Yes, I think at this unique time where we have a live action series and with such collaboration between the writers for the series and the writers for, the authors and the comics. And I did get to ask them a question once they were done. And I asked them, and they did say that the writing in the books and the comics, it obviously is influenced by the writing of the series, but also it's a two-way street, that what they are doing has influenced what is showing up, what will show up on the show. So I'm thinking that at this time, more so than anything, that they didn't say that it was canon, but that they are keeping everyone basically on the same page, so that it's going to go along much smoother than in any other time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that they're definitely doing a lot of integration. But when you ask that question, Amy, will these things be considered canon? They weren't willing to say yes, because I don't think they want to be boxed in by some of the things that happen.
But did you see them? They said no with their mouths, but yes with their heads.
I think you wanted them to say yes. No, but I give you credit for being brave enough to ask that, because it's kind of a touchy subject, what's canon and what isn't in the novels, and things have been overwritten before and all of that. But I think there's more coordination, and it's less likely that something will be, I think, specifically like overwritten. But it's possible, like over time, if Discovery is successful, goes on for a while, there's a ton of novels, that somewhere along the line some writer is going to do something that might conflict with what's on the screen, but it's definitely going to be coordinated a whole lot more than before.
You both are right. You're answering the question correctly.
One of the things which I thought was interesting about that is, they basically said, like, yeah, our intent is to make this all fully integrated, but there was that sort of like, caveat or whatever that, if the writers come up with something better, the show always comes first. So they're kind of like leaving that there. But I really do think that this is going to be a fully integrated thing. And I think that they do too, And I think that you can see that because unlike the approach that they've had with the other series where it's like, like those first Deep Space Nine novels were just like other adventures on Deep Space Nine, whereas this, it's like, what are the novels? They're going to be, something that takes place a year before, or right, yeah. What's going to happen? When does the other one take place, Bruce? Because they announced that there's going to be another novel coming out.
There's a second novel. They brought a special surprise guest. Author Dayton Ward came out, and he's writing the second Discovery novel that takes place 10 years prior to this, in 2245.
He said 10 years prior to Discovery, which would be 9 years prior
well,
to the
I
novel.
consider the first novel Discovery.
Well, they don't. They don't.
I do.
Okay, well, good.
2246 then. Okay.
Yeah, well, the way I interpreted it was like a year before the first episode of Discovery would be the first novel, and the second novel takes place 10 years before Discovery, which would be 2246. But they did say that there was some important event we'd be familiar with, and it would make more sense to be 2245 when the 1701 is launched.
My case in point.
That's
right
making
there.
your case. I mean, also, like, this is the first time we've gotten some of these dates, and it's possible somebody misspoke or something, but we're getting the general idea. And one of the things that I like is the second to-be-titled novel is going to be out in early 2018, which is the first, Trek novel that's been scheduled for 2018. Hallelujah. Because we've been waiting for that, right?
Yeah, let's get the rest of the schedule for 2018 because we haven't gotten that yet.
Yeah, it's August and we don't know some of the books in 2018. But that was really exciting. I don't know about you, Bruce, but I didn't expect at all that they were going to announce a second novel and bring out Dayton Ward, who's been somehow tight-lipped about it. He usually gives a little hint or something, but I didn't know he was working on or scheduled for anything like that.
Yeah, I'm really unhappy that they did not give me the heads up that this was going to happen. So this was all a surprise to me, too.
Speaking of other like corners of the universe that they can explore, with these various other projects, the comics are dealing with Discovery in their own unique way, and that's by giving a backstory to one of the main Klingon characters, to Kuvma, which is going to be a 4-issue miniseries, with the first issue coming out at the end of October. So, yeah. Amy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was excited since I now have been getting into more comics thanks to Bruce and Dan. And what I liked is hearing, that they were a lot of miniseries in a series. Yeah, series of miniseries. That's what it was. And to hear these, you're going to get, a little 4 issues on one little story, and then they are taking the ideas, from the show and saying, oh, well, that's interesting. Why don't we flesh that out a little more? And so it just seems like it's going to be a companion and very interesting to readers. I like the idea more so that there's not really going to be any of these villains and heroes, that they are going to be addressing the individuals who just happen to have competing agendas. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out in the comics as well.
What I find really interesting is I'm realizing there's this certain division. Like, we're going to get this first novel that's about Burnham and some of her background and getting to know her more, and then there'll be this 4-issue comic about Takuvma, and that's going to go into the Klingons. So they have like these kind of separate tracks where they're exploring Klingons in the comics and Burnham and presumably some Federation or Vulcan characters in the books. I think that's, I mean, maybe that's the kind of thing where they're setting things up so you can see what they were like before there's this confrontation that we've seen in some of the trailers. So I find it interesting that they're kind of dividing it up in that way.
Well, and also the novels all take place prior to the series. I'm not sure if the comic miniseries...
They didn't say when that would take place, and I made an assumption that it had something to do... Because I think why we're getting some of these, prequel comics... It sounds funny because it's prequel to a prequel series, but we're getting... Well, okay, so let's talk about the novel first, which is definitely... before the start of the series, so they're wanting to give that background, which I think is great and can feed into it, but I think by necessity they have to do that and can't have it concurrently when there might still be things that are changing or in flux, but they kind of know generally where it's going to lead. And I didn't think about it too much during the panel, but the Takuvma comics, I'm thinking, has some kind of background and isn't concurrent. That's what I thought, at least.
I'm thinking it's that, but maybe just prior to the series. Because I'm thinking how IDW does the Kelvin timeline, they're allowed to play in that sandbox where the novels haven't been. And I think because maybe the creators of the shows can monitor the comics a little easier, and they don't go as much detail as the novels, and they don't want stories to go into great detail into something that they're currently writing. So maybe it's easier to, stay prequel on the novels. Comics, you can come a little closer to the timeline.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And going off what you were saying, Amy, before, it is something they talked about, I think, in the actors panel, that there aren't really true villains, and I think they had talked somewhere about Fuller's intention being to not have the Klingons be like evil or the villains, but that you'd feel sympathetic to both sides. And it feels like one of the things that they're going to do is kind of showing things from a Federation side and from a Klingon side. So maybe more than you've seen before, there'll be this dual thing where you're seeing things from both sides of the story.
All right. So, any final thoughts on that panel? No? All right.
I'm just looking forward to reviewing these on Literary Treks.
All right. Yeah, we'll have to be sure to check out that their podcast. It was pretty amusing when you got up to ask your question, and everyone's like, "Hey, Bruce," they all know you. Yeah. So, okay, that was a lot. That was 4 hours worth of stuff, and it was crazy, but exciting and very interesting. Any final thoughts on just the day of disco, Justin?
Since they announced this, which wasn't that long ago, what was it, like, a week or two ago that they announced this was happening, I've been so excited. I've been excited about all these details about Discovery and seeing these panels. I think I woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I was like, I want to see this thing and see all these details and these reveals. So, I think it was everything I wanted it to be. I mean, of course, for the cast, right? I mean, it would have been great if there were more, but some of them are making the show. But the amount of time that they spent on it, 4 hours, 4 straight panels coordinating, writers and producers, actors, people who are doing the creature design, and then related to the books and comics. I mean, they have a lot still probably to do for these things, and they're taking time out of that their days and their weeks to do that in order to present something to the really big Star Trek fans that are here at STLV. I think really speaks to some of the commitment and the outreach that they're trying to do and how much they're trying to connect with the fans. So like the whole message that I got was all about the dedication to the story and to the history of Star Trek and being able to convey to the fans the great things that are going on and to be excited about it. And I was, as I've said on other places, I've already been really excited about Discovery for almost a couple of years now, but this made me like even more excited to the next level. Like, I want to see it right now.
How about you, Bruce?
I feel the same way. I am more excited about seeing the series now. What I'm impressed with is I was coming to this convention expecting not really getting anything on Discovery. I was even coming to this thinking we may not see much of Discovery at any convention until this series is over. And then the actors started appearing, and then we start hearing behind the scenes. This showed me that CBS and the people behind the show are seeing there is importance to the fan base and not just taking it for granted. Oh, they're Star Trek fans. They're going to watch anyway. They've got a product that they feel comfortable enough and confident enough to present to this. So to sit through 4 hours of panels with only standing up once to ask a question on the last panel, I did not feel like it was 4 hours of time. It flew by for me. And the amount of detail they're putting into it, the amount of effort, I'm sold. I'm so ready for the show. I can't wait. It's another month or 2 months, month and a half, whatever. I mean, it's just like, I'm ready for it right now.
Amy?
Yeah, I was pretty bummed. I recorded The Edge with Aaron, and he attended San Diego Comic-Con, and I was just like, oh man, I missed out. So I was very happy to see, this recently added Discovery panels for today. And I think on the last episode, Zach asked me, well, where's your excitement now? And I was like, after listening to Aaron talk about San Diego Comic-Con, I was like, oh, I'm at a 10. Well, okay, that's been busted wide open. Like, I'm at 50. I'm so excited because it really feels like they're honest, they're sincere. Each of them, all of the many of them, from the production to the actors to the writers, that they all are understanding what Trek is, and that is, telling a good story about good characters and having that relate and have meaning to our current day life and situation. And so keeping that Trek vision seems ever paramount in everyone's mind, which makes me even more excited because I love the Trek vision as well. So I'm, off the charts, cannot wait, very excited for today.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing, aside from the whole Klingon thing that we talked about, I think the thing which really sort of made me excited was the excitement that the people making this show have for it. And, certainly we've been down this road before where people are like, this is the best thing ever. This is the best movie I've ever made or whatever. And then you watch it and you're like, really, dude? Okay, let's have this conversation again in 5 years and see what you say then. I understand that they're marketing their product, but like we said, these people are big fans, and when you have people, like Glenn Hetrick talk about how he's has a religious dedication to canon, and when you hear people like Ted Sullivan talk about how they just watched the new episode of Disco and it was Wrath of Khan level good, like I believe them to be sincere, and it makes me really freaking excited to see this show, and in like 6 weeks we'll be able to. So yeah, I'm happy. All right, so Justin, you're brand new to the network. Where can people find you?
Well, you can now find me on Earl Grey, where we talk about Star Trek The Next Generation every week. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. And after we're done with STLV and I have time to do it again, I'll be resuming my TNG Season 3 rewatch. And you can also find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook.
Bruce, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. And you can find me here on Trek.fm, co-hosting Literary Treks with Dan Gunther, talking about the books and comics of Star Trek and also Star Trek Discovery books and comics. And also you'll find me talking Star Wars on the Star Wars Report podcast at StarWarsReport.com, where we also talk about Sam Witwer. And then you can find me in the Babel Conference.
And what about you, Amy?
You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, and then here on the network, podcasting with Justin and Richard for Earl Grey, which is our next gen podcast. But my favorite place is on the Babel Conference.
Excellent. And you can find me right here on the network doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek, and that includes a lot of these Discovery people. So if you can't get enough Discovery here on the Edge, head on over to Stage 9, and we got you covered. You can also find me on thenerdparty.com doing a show called Great Shot Kid, and you can find me on talkfilmsociety.com doing a show called Soderbergh 2828, and you can find me on commentarytrackstars.com doing a show called Commentary Trackstars. And you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. Well, it's been real fun talking about Star Trek Las Vegas here at Star Trek Las Vegas today, but that's not all we're talking about here on Trek.fm this week, so here's a look at what you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Orb.
After the Captain's documentary, I think we all wish that there had been a piano in Sisko's quarters, and at some point in every episode, someone walked in and he was just over in the corner rambling away.
Warp 5.
And there's a wipe from right to left in the screen, and you never see that on Star Trek. It completely pulls me out of the episode every time I see it.
Thanks a lot, because I've never noticed it.
Yeah, I didn't notice it.
Ever! Now I'm going to see it. Okay.
You just ruined the entire episode for everyone listening.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
The 602 Club.
That's a really smart idea, because that's also something that, Caesar sees, is that we're not that different.
The Ready Room.
As with so many places, CBS in marketing the show and getting it out to as many eyeballs as possible, they're obviously wanting fans and armchair fans and maybe would-be fans, genre fans who might give Star Trek but they're still trying to get out to the great unwashed and the mundanes, and this is actually stretching the season out beyond 15 actual weeks.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and discover what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on your iPhone or iPad or Apple TV or wherever else you get your Apple stuff. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. That really helps us out a lot. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our show on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps. And you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link as well. If you want to contact us, we'd love to hear for you. You can go to the Babel Conference, like Amy was saying, and, join the larger conversation. Just go to Facebook and type Babel, that's Babel, into the search field, and we should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, go to our website, trek.fm/contact, choose to send to a show, and select the Edge. That will come right to us, and you can also find the network on Twitter at Trek.fm or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We'd like to thank our associate producers today, Lisa Slack, Tony Robinson, and Norman C. Lau. Thank you very much, guys. If you'd like to be like Lisa, Tony, and Norm, head on over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become a patron of the network. If you visit patreon.com/TrekFM, that's patreon.com/TrekFM, you can find all of the details, including perks like early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. So please, if you can, head on over there, help us out. We would really appreciate the support. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. All right. It's been a day. It's been a crazy day, and I'm tapped out. I'm going home tomorrow. I don't know how you guys are going to make it through the rest of the weekend, but good luck with that.
We've got a few more days going strong. It's TNG 30, so I'm loving it here.
Yeah, and this episode, I mean, it's going to come out on Friday, so there's still going to be 3 days of con. So if anyone out there sees Amy or Bruce or Justin,
yes,
say
please
hi.
Come say hi. I was wearing my Trek.fm shirt today, so got to represent, but I'm very excited. I will be cosplaying Troy in her blue dress on Saturday, so please come say hi.
Awesome. All right, well, that's it for this week, but we will be back here next week on The Edge.